Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. On behalf of the three co-hosts, the Universidad de los Andes in Bogota, the World Bank's Research Department, and the Joint Data Center on Forced Displacement, it's my honor to welcome you to this research conference. You're attending the second conference focused exclusively on socioeconomic research on those forcibly displaced and their hosts. My name is Björn Gillsäter. I'm the head of the Joint Data Center here in Copenhagen. We've just seen the faces of refugees, IDPs, and stateless people from around the world. Our conference is about people and individuals. Please keep these women, men, youth, children in mind as we proceed over the next 3 days. The Joint Data Center views itself, among other things, as a convener of research and policy folks who share a deep, serious, and sincere interest in improving the lives of those forcibly displaced through robust quantitative research. We also believe it's our job to create a platform where researchers can share and test their latest work with their peers, but importantly also with policymakers and practitioners. And we fund data collection in some 20 countries and populate libraries for all you researchers and practitioners to draw from. We're delighted to have close to 800 people registered for this conference, with a good mix of academics, government representatives, and national organization professionals, and civil society colleagues. The sheer size of this figure is inspiring in itself. It shows both a commitment to data, facts, and to evidence, and an eagerness to learn, to find solutions. During these 3 days, we will mainly focus on the 85 million of those 84 million refugees, IDPs, and stateless people who have taken refuge in a country in the global south. The 85% is a statistic that is often lost on the general public. But I was really pleased to see how many of the authors of the papers that we will be discussing make this point up front. Let's also not forget that more than half of the world's displaced, some 48 million, are displaced within their own country. This group tends to get the least support and needs more attention. Further, let us keep in mind that we're looking at the increasing protractedness of displacement, and hence we need to take a comprehensive approach beyond just humanitarian needs. 2 years ago, we held the first conference ever devoted exclusively to the socioeconomic dimensions of forced displacement. As we wrapped up that conference, two of the main takeaways were: one, a sense that the challenges faced by those internally displaced were under-researched in relationship to the scale and magnitude of the challenge, and two, that the academic diversity at that conference was too limited. There was a clear majority of economists. There was a sense at that time that we needed to cast a wider academic net and learn also from other disciplines, including political science, data science, and sociology, etc. Those takeaways have guided the focus of this conference. I want to take a word on the selection of papers. We received some 154 submissions to our call for papers. In selecting, priority was given to those papers that tackled interesting and original research questions, while adopting robust, innovative, and analytical methods. And they all had to be relevant to the improvement of the lives of the 85% displaced in the global south. We believe that all the papers that are presented over the next 3 days satisfy these requirements. Let me recognize the scientific committee in charge of selecting the papers that we will be discussing. Juan Do at the World Bank, Andres Moya at the Universidad de los Andes, and Domenico Tabasso here at the JDC, ably assisted by Charlotte Persson with the JDC. Please put your cameras on. Thank you. Now to help us set the stage and put our work in a wider context, and in some cases in a political context, we've invited three distinguished and very well-placed speakers to offer opening remarks. First, I have the honor to welcome George Okoth-Obbo. George has a long and distinguished career in the UN's Refugee Agency, including as Assistant High Commissioner for Programs. Most recently, he served as the head of the Secretariat of the UN's Secretary General's High-Level Panel on Internal Displacement. Starting next month, George will take up the position as the UN Secretary General's Special Advisor on Responsibility to Protect. We're really pleased to have you with us, George. The floor is yours. We can't hear you. At least I can't.
Björn, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I was thanking you, the GDC, of course, the University of Los Andes and the World Bank, really for this opportunity to join this event and to share some thoughts. Quite frankly, there will be no more than thoughts. I'm also grateful to make this reconnection through the JDC with what I might even call my mother organization. As you have just said, I was there as a long-time cadre in trying to support the cause of refugees. And then, of course, the World Bank and UNHCR in particular were two of the strongest supporters of the high-level panel that you mentioned. And I was very, very delighted to see that one of the panel members and my very, very dear friend, Paula Gaviria, will also be in this event with us and to hear from her. As Björn mentioned, I have now finished my work and support to the panel, and 20 days ago formally retired from UNHCR. I will therefore be speaking personally, but very much to draw on those experiences in putting on the table some thoughts from an interested player in this. I do have no pretensions at all to being an academic, but drawing on these experiences, the UNHCR track, the panel track, and anticipating a little bit my forthcoming functions, what are some of the things that I would put on the table when it comes to the handshake between research and the internal displacement problematic? I have a few things that I would like to share. The very first one, Björn, and to all dear colleagues, is that I personally, but the panel very, very much recognized the crucial importance of knowledge creation, knowledge propagation, and knowledge instrumentalization as central to where the internal displacement issue is now and where it should go in terms of some of the shifts that the panel has called for. This is how you have advertised this conference and its objectives. So just to say that I personally and very definitely the panel is very much aligned with this objective. The truth is that in the more than 30 years since Francis Deng started the global initiative that has led to many, many good developments, there has already been a lot of research, there has been a lot of knowledge. But I think the panel was very much exercised to see that the internal displacement issue in key respect still remains at what you might call a discovery stage, and the need, therefore, to continue illuminating, as the title of its report says, the internal displacement issue. A lot of the knowledge and research that has been done and continues to be done today around this question is done conjunctively and by placing the internal displacement issue as part of the refugee and forced migration issue. And this has very, very many good advantages, including, for example, with protection, which I think we would all recognize as one of the most important. But there are also limitations. There are also limitations which have come with this, not least of all probably I would highlight the very strong humanitarian emblem which has been placed on the internal displacement issue. It is, of course, a humanitarian problem, but not only so. So the panel, as for those of you who have seen the report, you will have seen that both in its shifts and in some of the things that it calls for research in particular, wants to see that angling, the plus angling, if you like, to take the internal displacement issue in other directions. What are some of these? Here, I'll put forward something which I recognize is maybe a little bit controversial. And that is to say that without trying to firewall the internal displacement issue or to pigeonhole it, it is clear that there is a need for some more particular and some more distinctive and bespoke research around the internal displacement issue, especially to draw it a little bit more broadly than where the transpositional research that has set it within the refugee and forced displacement construct has limited it. And I'll mention some of this. So for example, if this discussion was to lead to some kind of agenda of research, I think this, the distinctive nature would be one of the things to be drawn from the work of the panel. Secondly, the panel was very clear in calling for instrumentalization of research, i.e. the generation of knowledge, but to link that generation to outcomes which are specifically defined in the report. There are many of these, but to take just two of them, the first of those really is the visibilization of the internal displacement issue. It has been visibilized quite a lot in a number of contexts, including a number of those discussed in the papers that will be considered in this conference. But in many, many contexts, it's still a hidden issue. It is still an issue in the shadows. It is still an orphan issue which is not even on. So the panel talks a lot about this. And secondly, with regard particularly to solutions. But the point I'm making at this stage is this handshake that research must have to the generation of outcomes. If I talk a little bit about that, I think there are a few things that we could break down. And now I go back to a little bit of the framing issues. And Björn, I'll try to run very quickly through this so that I can stay within the time that I have. The first, I would say, is a general framing issue. And to put it in a nutshell, it is that this is a humanitarian plus a different issue. And that is an issue of citizens who are in distress. And that there is fundamentally a failure of accountability to them from different sources. If there was time, I would go a little bit into this in the point that I made earlier on about the limits of the transpositional approach to research. But let me just say, secondly now, that clearly in the internal displacement context, political economy is much, much stronger as a research and an outcome resource than it would be in protection where it is set fundamentally only in a legal construct, as my experience in UNHCR taught me. So that, I think, is one of the issues which, if again we were to translate this into some kind of research agenda, I think what the panel was saying would illuminate that issue. Secondly, there are particular dimensions which the panel highlighted that should see much, much more visibility than now. And there are three which I'll mention here very quickly. The first, I go back to the emphasis on solutions. And in the solutions that the panel has depicted, it is above all solutions as a development question, but not only, because there is a peace dimension, there is a disaster, there is a climate change, and there could be other nexuses if you wanted to attach to them. This is really a key issue because the panel itself in its work, when it now started to look at what are the implications of that, it found that the literature, the knowledge was not as vast as there should be. And therefore, its partnership with a lot of the research institutions was really to fill that gap. I believe that that agenda, Björn, and dear friends, remains on the agenda for research in the internal displacement issue. Two more quick questions here. The first of those has to do with data. Here, again, in the panel saying that development is where we need to lean, these shifts that that the panel is calling for, it has implications for data. As a humanitarian, as a refugee officer, I am very familiar with the case data, which tends to be individualized, and case data which is linked to protection as a personal experience. I think the moment we start to lean to the question of data in the context of development, it is very, very different and leads us to much, much more a trend leaning, more centered within governments, more coupled with national questions above all development issues. And if I say that, for those of you who have read the report, you will see the recommendations that the panel makes. And finally, the issue of good practices and evidence. I know that my friend Paula will speak a little bit about this, so let me not go there too much. But I think if there was time, and certainly in the discussions to come, again, what the panel has said would be important. So to conclude now, I will just run very quickly through three questions. The first of those is what I would call the configuration question. If research is going to be directed towards helping create outcomes, important outcomes, solutions outcomes which are set within government, the question then is, how is this research articulated by the #1 accountability holder for those outcomes, i.e. states and governments? Who defines these agendas? Who carries out this research? How is it done? Who is the deliverer? Who is the responder on this? So this is the configuration question. The second one is, quite frankly, and certainly I can say this much more emphatically as my personal view, is that most of the agenda around this issue and the knowledge is still very much cast as a global South issue, i.e. internal displacement in the global South countries, etc., etc. The panel could see so clearly, and I think we all know, that internal displacement is a global issue, including in the global North. And that then impacts the relationship of research, the definition of that research, and the players within that research. And I think that is an important issue. And the very last one is the issue of networking, coordination, and coherence. I think one of the delights of the panel was to see the different initiatives. The JDC is one of them. Researching internal displacement program. There are many we could go on, but I think the interest is to see if all of these are going to work towards the objectives, such as those that I have touched on and more we'll hear about. How will they all work together? How will they network? How shall we close some of these gaps that I have alluded to, and there are more? And I think one of the biggest ones for me really is this Global South, Global North issue, the framing issues and so on. How will the greatest possible degree of coherence be achieved, not only at global, but regional and national level? And in saying that, I conclude now in thanking you for listening to me by urging all of you to please stay with and follow as closely as you can the follow-up of the panel's report. If later on in the discussion there is time to come back to that, I would be happy to give you some more information. But for now, thank you so much for listening to me. Back to you.
Thank you, Dort, for being both comprehensive and so clear and insightful. Wonderful way to kick this off, and you have some very clear messages for us. Next, I am pleased to introduce Marie Pangestu. Marie is the Managing Director for Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank. Before joining the bank, very recently, she served as Indonesia's Minister of Trade for 7 years and as Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy for 3 years. Mrs. Pangestu, we are honored to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Björn, and good day to everybody. I would like to thank the organizers, especially our colleagues at UNHCR and the School of Economics at Universidad de los Andes for their collaboration on this very important agenda. As the number of forcibly displaced people globally increases to over 82 million, data and research on forced displacement have really gained renewed urgency. This conference will bring forth new knowledge to strengthen the global community's ability to make timely and evidence-based decisions that will improve the lives of affected people. I'm pleased to see practitioners from academia, development, and government gathered here, as we will need our collective wisdom to tackle this challenge. Forced displacement is not just a humanitarian concern. It also poses a significant development challenge, as displacement becomes more protracted, with about 16 million people now in exile for over 5 years. This puts pressure on host communities, especially in developing countries, who themselves are struggling to address multiple crises, from the impact of COVID-19 to climate change. As forced displacement worsens, interlinked with such crises, knowledge plays an increasingly critical role for developing countries. Research and data help to build support for the agenda by underpinning discussions at global fora. It supports policy dialogue, helping policymakers think through solutions as they work to recover and get back on track to achieve a green, resilient, and inclusive development. At the Bank, knowledge is central to our support, in line with our mission to reduce poverty and promote shared prosperity in a sustainable manner. We are committed to creating, improving, and sharing knowledge on development challenges, including on forced displacement. I'm happy, therefore, to let you know that the 2023 World Development Report, the World Bank Group's flagship report on development policy, will focus on migration and forced displacement. Knowledge also informs our operational work on forced displacement, which continues to grow in scale. With the support of our shareholders, we achieved a record 93 billion commitment in December to replenish the International Development Association, or IDA, our fund for the poorest. This means more support to people and countries affected by fragility, conflict, and violence. And this includes 2.4 billion in earmarked financing for refugees and host communities, in addition to the 45 projects in 18 countries that are ongoing, amounting to almost 2.5 billion. In middle-income countries, the Global Concessional Financing Facility provides support for host communities to address refugee crisis. In Jordan, Lebanon, Colombia, and Ecuador, over $600 million have been approved to help leverage close to $6 billion in concessional financing. These investments rely on the evidence base built up over the years, where partnerships have played a critical role. The Joint Data Center is an excellent example of how we have partnered with UNHCR and others to make a strong contribution to high-quality, policy-relevant research. For example, a study conducted with UNHCR found that the average annual cost of educating all refugee children is less than 4% of public education expenditure on average in developing countries, which host 85% of the world's refugees. Research like this will help us better integrate refugees in public policies. The Joint Data Center also supports global statistical work on forced displacement. Due to the protracted nature of forced displacement, a significant upgrade in the quality and comparability, quantity, and usability of data is really needed. We are innovating in the way we collect data, including through the novel use of satellite imagery, mobile phone data, and citizen-generated inputs to produce more granular and timely information. For example, in the Central African Republic, we work with the National Statistical Office on data collection of internally displaced persons living in camps and among the general population, who were previously not systematically included in the National Household Survey. This will inform government policies and donor assistance and help to identify data collection gaps in fragile situations. Our joint goal, I believe, is to better the lives of the displaced and their host communities. And to succeed, we must continue to work together more closely than ever. Having worked in both academia as well as government, I'm very interested in your thoughts and suggestions. What are the most concerning data gaps when it comes to forced displacement? What are the research areas where we need to probe more deeply? Do we know enough about the gender dimensions of forced displacement? These are just some of the questions that I had in my mind, and I really look forward to hearing more about your research over the next 3 days. Good luck on your deliberations, and I really look forward to hearing the results of your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Pangestu. I think you set the stage very nicely, not least for the policy session that we will be holding later today, which is partly precisely about the transmission mechanism that you were talking about. How can we use research in policy setting and in programming? So thank you for highlighting that in particular. Wonderful. Next, I'm going to turn to Paula Gaviria Betancur. Paula is the executive director of Compass Foundation. She's a lawyer and journalism specialist. She was a member of the UN SG's high-level panel on internal displacement that George just spoke about. She's also a former presidential advisor for human rights in Colombia and former director of their Distinguished Victims Unit. Among her many achievements, she was active in the negotiations of the final peace agreement, which was signed by the Colombian government and the FARC guerrilla, for which I believe the then Colombian president was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Paula, we're delighted to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bjorn, and hello to all. Thank you to JDC, World Bank, UNHCR, and Los Andes University, my university, for this invitation. A warm hello to my dear colleague, George. The global crisis of the millions of people forced to flee their homes each year and others trapped in protracted displacement is not a crisis of numbers. It is one of profound human suffering. The world has committed to leave no one behind by 2030. We have 7 years to go. So we have to really work together to achieve that the internally displaced persons reintegrate into society and reach a point where they no longer have needs associated with being displaced. In the actual context, it's been said, the use of data, its analysis and research are key tools that have to be stimulated more than before. This conference comes in a perfect timing. George said it. Its agenda with the 24 selected papers with various topics reinforces the idea we picked up in the panel's work on the role of the academia and research to set out the path for change that is required and that George developed in depth. Strengthening the effective use of internal displacement data is key to build understanding and the capacity to prevent and respond to internal displacement, creating political will, improving accountability, and ensuring the approaches reflect the experiences of people of all ages, genders, and diversities. In the high-level panel, we received at least 45 submissions that recall the need for better data and statistics on internal displacement. Some lessons from the Colombia's policy innovations in responding to displacement. In 2011, Colombia decided to address the suffering of victims affected by decades of armed conflict. With a strong consensus of society, a broad participation of the victims, and a political will at the highest level, it designed a public policy and an institutional framework to address and provide reparations to victims. This effort was made in the midst of an ongoing conflict. We came from years of debates about numbers and data. We knew that data and evidence were critical. We committed to an evidence-based approach to action. So the first thing we decided to face was the construction of a unique registry of victims, which integrates the different databases on victims. Today, that registry recognizes 8.2 million internally displaced persons and a total of 9.2 victims of other crimes as well. The most robust official registry of victims that any state has, and a critical tool for decision-making. At the same time, we built a national information network that carries out joint analysis of the information and strengthens the capacity of local authorities and others on the collection and management of data. By strengthening the effective use of the data, we promoted national ownership and accountability on internal displacement, and the possibility of setting common objectives and goals with national and international partners, and most important, promoted transparency and accountability as key elements to mitigate the lack of trust, as well as the lack of legitimacy of institutions, another of the effects of decades of conflict. Here, a very advanced system for participation at the national, regional, and local levels, with the inclusion of all the differential approaches and gender parity is in place, so the internally displaced take an active part in the decisions that affect them. We saw in the more than 12,500 displaced and host communities with whom we spoke in the high-level panel that they have a voice and they want to be heard. The magnitude of the victimization, the disproportionate impacts, especially on women, children, and ethnic communities, made it a priority to better understand their needs and also their capacities. So we adopted a psychosocial approach that recognized that the victims of displacement had enormous capacities and the agency to decide on their future. After 40 years of several attempts to put an end to conflict, in 2016, the peace agreement was signed with the FARC guerrilla. The implementation of this ambitious agreement, which seeks to address both the causes and consequences of Colombia's long-standing conflict, has required the decisive involvement of the academia and the unrestricted support of the international community. However, new massive displacement and confinements persist. There were 80,000 new people displaced in 2021. Drivers of displacement have been insufficiently addressed. More investment has to be made in prevention, and definitely more research is needed. Finally, while the country made steps towards reconciliation by reintegrating 13,000 former FARC ex-combatants, it had to learn to integrate almost 2 million Venezuelans. Of these, more than 200,000 have received the special protection statute that gives them a 10-year stay in Colombia. The progress for this population is the reestablishment of their rights with this protection status is huge. However, it also presents great challenges for Colombia, since most of these migrants are arriving in areas where internally displaced persons are present. Here, the role of the private sector and the academia has been key. I conclude by saying that this conference gives me hope. The papers, their innovative questions and proposals prove that we are awake and willing to put our collective energy at the service of those who most need our solidarity, but above all, in favor of the urgent responses needed by the states and the international community. Thank you, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Paula. Love your energy and passion, and also to giving us a very concrete example of some very forward-leaning policies introduced by Colombia over the years, including this year and last when it comes to Venezuelan refugee-like populations. Thank you very much. So we have heard from our three opening speakers. I hope that you feel that they've set the stage, given some ideas and energy, and I think we will have reason to come back to the words that we have heard this past half hour during the conference over the 3 days. So we're gonna kick it off. I'm next going to hand over to Nelly Pomming, who will tell us about some housekeeping